students of IIM Ahmedabad, faculty, guests, those who are virtually, digitally connected. Let me say what a great pleasure it is to be here today and have a chance to interact with you. I unfortunately belong to a generation where they didn't send us here for our mid-career training. So I've not had the benefit of prior exposure. But I was just mentioning that if the Indian ambassador in Moscow and in Ukraine are both graduates of management from here, I think diplomacy and management has a fair chance in that conflict. But today, the topic which I chose to speak was about the transformation of Indian foreign policy over the last decade. When you look at, how do you judge transformation, how do you perceive transformation? One, of course, is the manner in which we look at the world. Today, not just look at the world, how do we interact with the world? Much of that has got easier. Today, it's possible to get a passport in a few days. In fact, people grumble if it is more than a few days. Whereas there was an era when getting a passport was itself a lifetime achievement, and it certainly took a few months, sometimes even longer. But it's also an era where more of us travel abroad as students, as tourists, in business, for work. So our sense of the world, what our expectations are of the world, what our understanding of the world is obviously very different from what it was a decade or two ago. At the same time, what are the consequences of the world are also something which we have come to realize very sharply. For the last 2.5 years, all our lives have been deeply and dramatically affected by something which happened quite far away from us and came to our homes and into our lives as a pandemic. We saw how a conflict can affect people. Many of you would have watched the 20,000 students who were caught in the Ukraine conflict. Or sometimes, it could be what happens on our borders, what could happen due to terrorism in our cities. So there's no question the world means much more to us. It impacts our lives. We must understand it. We must study it more carefully. But actually, that's not what I want to focus on today. I want to focus on the mirror image of that phenomenon. How does the world see us? And part of the reason was I said to myself, okay, I'm coming to an institute of management. So let me try to guess how they, what is their way of looking at my business. And when I looked at the last decade, this transformation that I speak about, I would suggest to you that the transformation has most of all been in the branding of India abroad. And that means, in a sense, you can say, how does the customer see the product? In this case, we are the product, we India, and the customer is the world. So how does India see the world rather than normally what I speak about, which is what are the opportunities and challenges abroad? So it is reflected in how we are treated by the world, how we are respected or not by the world, the extent to which we are welcomed in different societies, or occasionally maybe less, and where are the opportunities which come from all of that. Now, the enhanced branding, the stronger branding, that I would suggest has happened to us in the last decade, to my mind, comes from 10 factors. And that's really what I would like to talk to you about. Let me start with the most recent one. I spoke about how the COVID has impacted our lives. And I say this to you as a person who is traveling abroad through the COVID, after the COVID, who has had a chance to compare how others have handled it and listen to them about what they think about us. And people, countries, my counterparts, students like you in other countries, actually are staggered if you tell them that, we have done 2 billion plus vaccinations. And more than, I think, the public or the intelligentsia or the academic communities of other countries, it is actually the policymakers, because the policymakers really understand that it was extremely hard to produce the vaccine in the first place, but to get the shot in the arm was actually an exercise in itself. So for a society to organize itself and get 2 billion shots in the arm is actually a staggering achievement. And it's an achievement that today, because we've all got those shots in the arm, we have normalized it. So I would like you to understand that it is an achievement which is deeply respected by the world, and it's something that we should be very proud of. Now, it's not just the shot in the arm. If you think back maybe a decade, maybe less, normally if something happened and there was a solution, certainly in the medical field, we probably would not have been the first in the queue. It would have happened in Europe, America, it would have found its way slowly to us. I'm not saying we'd be last in the queue, but for sure we'd be somewhere in the second half. And this time, actually, we were not just around the same time as everybody else, but as I said, when it comes to actually organizing ourselves for the vaccination, we managed it. And even today, if you look at the percentages of people who've had their vaccination, we still compare very favorably to a very large number of societies in the world. And here's the really interesting thing when it comes to COVID. The CoWIN platform, the idea that from day one, and I was, thanks to my venerable age, in the first lot of people who managed to actually get a shot. So I think it was March 1, if my memory serves me right. So the Prime Minister got it in the morning, I went in the afternoon. And the fact is, the idea that you got your vaccination, you got your certification, you got your phone message to go for the next one, that it was organized, in a way the cohorts came in the way they did. That kind of, I would say, systematic, digitized handling of vaccination is something which actually others look at us. And I would say today we have, of course, we have built a brand today as a pharmacy of the world, but we have also actually strengthened our branding as a digital society. And that to me is the first reason right now why we are looked at with greater respect by the world. The second reason is the economic recovery. And here there were questions of, very frankly, of judgment, of experience, of really in a crisis, Where do you commit your resources? Where, in what manner, how much, so that actually you come out of the tunnel in the best possible manner. Now, everybody had a fair shot at this problem. There were people who really gave big breaks to their businesses because they felt that the businesses were struggling, and if the businesses would revive, it would trickle down to the society. The different people handled it differently. We focused a lot on creating social safety nets, and I'll talk about that later. But we also used this period to actually execute a lot of reforms and changes, some of which you could say were overdue. But the fact is, today, we are poised for an economic recovery, for a growth of 7-8%, which, if you look at the rest of the world, obviously developed economies would have lower growth rates. So I'm not comparing apples and oranges here. But even relatively speaking, I think the world looks at our economic recovery with, again, a great deal of respect. But the other part of it was how, where did we put our resources and what did we do here? I don't really know if we ourselves are fully cognizant of the enormity of what we have done in the last 3 years. When I go out of India, I use a metaphor. I tell them, I have a 800-400 story to tell you. The 800 are 800 million people who, from the time of the lockdown, a few months after the lockdown, till today, are receiving food from the government, so that we never had the kind of problem we had when the Spanish flu was here, which was more people dying of starvation than actually of the disease. And the 400 number is the 400 million people who get money put in their bank accounts every month, which gives them that margin to deal with a very distressing period. And this 800-400 has happened again because we are a digitized society. That we have today, thanks to Aadhaar, thanks to Jan Dhan Yojana, thanks to people having bank accounts, thanks to the bank account, the phone number, wherever required, the bank account, the PAN card, this connection, and the ability of the state to actually support its citizens without loss and transmission. This is actually a huge achievement. Now, you could say, okay, well, that's what you're doing at times of distress. But I want to drive home to you that there are actually, in a range of other areas, a vast social transformation which is taking place. The one which of course, captured the imagination of the world the most was actually Swachh Bharat and toilet building. Because if there was a blot on our public image, this was one. And the fact that we have constructed 100 million toilets, that there is a very visible improvement in the cleanliness, in the sanitation of India. That we actually today rank cities and compete, create a competitive environment for people to improve their conditions of living. That's actually had, again, a very big impact abroad. But if I were to give you some other examples, you're all familiar with the Ujjwala scheme, okay, replacing firewood with LPG. Now, the beneficiaries of Ujjwala scheme exceed the population of Germany. The beneficiaries' last count is 93 million. There is today a scheme called Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is to give, to support house building in India. There's an urban variant, which right now 6 million houses have been done. the rural Gramin Awas Yojana, which 18 million people have been done. Now, if you consider 24 million houses which have been done in this period, and if you take the average size of an Indian family, which is 4.8, that means 110 million people in the last 3 years have a home of their own, which they did not have before. Now, I could give you other examples. Mudra, the loan scheme. The beneficiaries of Mudra exceed the population of the United States, 350 million people, of which 230 million people are women. So, this scale of what is happening in India, in fact, if you even tally up the various insurance yojanas, between the three of them, the beneficiaries, and there obviously will be overlaps there, are 450 million people. So that sense of India, if there is a feeling that a country is under transformation, actually large parts of the world are looking at us, not necessarily getting into the debates that we have in India. And those debates are natural in a democratic society. But because they are at a distance, in a sense, they are cutting out the clutter and looking at really what is changing in India. And they see an India today which is far more digital, which is far more socially supportive, where the infrastructure is coming up at a very rapid rate, which is much easier to do business. Still far from perfect, but much easier to do business. And where there is a certain buzz and an energy, which I think the world values. Because if you look at the rest of the world, very honestly, as a compulsive traveler, every time I want to feel optimistic, I come back home. So that's really the state of the world. Now, the third factor is actually the impact we are making on the world, because the world is feeling that impact. Now, there are different ways you can quantify it. Our exports today are more. In fact, last year was the highest ever exports we've had, which is $670 billion. Because we are a developing economy with a high rate of growth, obviously our imports are more as well. And our imports are maybe about $100 billion more, $750 billion. But I want you to understand again what this means when you go out. And I've just come back from a part of the world where Indians, even Indian foreign ministers, normally don't travel, or don't travel as frequently as they should, which is Latin America. Now, when I went to countries like Brazil and Argentina, we are today buying multiple billions of dollars of particular products. Say, take edible oil. Our import of edible oil from Latin America alone is today maybe about $4 billion, $5 billion. So what has happened? I don't think it's something which is obvious to us sitting at home. At the other end of the world, India has become the fourth largest trading partner of Argentina and the fifth largest trading partner of Brazil. Now, I bet, I'm pretty sure that surprised many of you. You would have thought, okay, we'd be trading, but maybe our numbers would be very much less. It's also the benefits the world is discovering in terms of the economic impact we can make, and a lot of that is our human resources. So it could be the R&D side of India, it could be the contract manufacturing, the design contracting that takes place here. It could be today actually physical manufacturing in India, because we have made it easier to do business, because actually the quality of human resources is improving, because there is a culture of innovation and startup and technology in this country. When you have, when the public discourse today says, I've changed the drone policy, we have produced 100 unicorns. That's a very different discourse than we had 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And the world is responding to that, because you can see that For example, in the volume of the foreign direct investment, which last year was also at an all-time high of $84 billion. So the sense, again, the economic sense I want to convey to you is, for the rest of the world, we are mattering more and more. We are mattering as a market. We are mattering as a producer. We are mattering as an inventor. I cannot tell you how much respect there is for the fact that we made our own vaccine. That has really resonated. So this, you've all heard of made in India, for sure. But that sense of invent in India is also something which is today getting traction. And I think it's very significantly responsible for upgrading our brand. Now let me move out of the economic side to the political side. You all know we are going through, the world is going through a very complicated conflict in Ukraine. And the world is very polarized as a consequence. Now, in a very polarized world, obviously, all countries come under pressure from this side or that side. The fact that we have taken an independent stance, the fact that we have made decisions which we believe are the right decisions from the perspective of the welfare of our people, that is something, again, the world has noted. So the independence of India's positions, and the balance. I mean, it's not just about us. In many ways, we are also articulating the sentiments and the feelings of a lot of other countries who may not be that confident today in expressing the same. So, to my mind, the fourth reason for the brand improvement is really that a stronger confidence and a more independent voice with which we have spoken out on global issues and made our decisions on that. A fifth one is actually how resolute we have been. How resolute we have been, for example, when we have been challenged in the border areas. 2 years ago, in the middle of COVID, we had the Chinese actually move forces in violation of agreements, and that we stood our ground. That 2 years from then, we have been working it out without making concessions. I think again the world has noted that this is a country which is capable of defending its interests, that it will not yield, that it would be both strong on the ground and vocal in terms of putting out its interests. Now, one part of it, as I said, is obviously about the gains you make, the interests you defend. But the world always also looks like we do at people. How creative are they? How innovative are they in looking at issues? And we have emerged in the last few years as among the more innovative powers when it comes to diplomacy. And two examples of that innovation actually both involve 4 countries. One is a mechanism called the Quad that we revived in 2017. It had a false start a decade ago, and today is actually counted as among the more effective, more credible platforms to deal with shared challenges and common concerns of a lot of countries in the Indo-Pacific area. On the other end, in the Middle East, in West Asia, we are attempting something. It's at an earlier stage. It's something called I2U2. It's a grouping of US, India, UAE, and Israel. And here the focus is much more on the economic, technology, sort of civil society cooperation. But that we have been nimble, we have been creative, we have done something that is very contemporary when it comes to diplomacy, which is a diplomacy which was stuck either in treaties and alliances, or which hoped the UN would step in every time there's trouble, and the UN has been less and less willing or capable of doing it, or that people found bilateral fixes. Now, we have come up with a none of the above answer, which is there are situations where countries have to come together, find ways of working together, not necessarily doing it with all the rigor and the legal commitments that traditional diplomacy is used to. And that actually is something the rest of the world is looking at with a lot of interest. Now, having said that, we are in many ways a very unique society. We have a lot of Indians abroad, about 32 to 34 million Indians or people of Indian origin live and work abroad. I mentioned earlier that we increasingly treat the world not just as a marketplace but also as a workplace. And this determination, willingness on our part to look after our own at times of difficulty, this has also hugely resonated with the world. And we saw that during COVID. Many of you would be familiar with what we call the Vande Bharat mission. And during this period, depending on how you count the numbers, technically about something like, I think, 8 million people plus came back on the Vande Bharat missions of various forms. But a very large proportion of them actually were people who were returning home because they were stranded abroad during COVID. And this was the largest, actually, as far as I know, recorded evacuation that any country has ever done in history. And of course, from a institutional point of view, in the foreign ministry, it meant while everybody was working from home during COVID, our homes were in the office during this period because we were actually working 24/7, 365 days a week in multiple shifts, so that this 7 to 8 million people could actually come home. And this was very important. It was very important because it showed this could be our tourists who were stranded, it could be our students, it could be our workers. You would be surprised how many Indian seafarers there are today in the world. And when COVID happened, in many cases, the shipping lines discharged them at some port. And then they had the challenge of coming back. So how do a country is respected if it demonstrates that willingness to do what it takes to look after its people. And the COVID that way was a situation which compelled us, and we dug deep into our own strengths, and I think surprised ourselves in many ways by how much we could do, just as we did at home through vaccination. I think Vande Bharat was also an example of what all of the government and all of the system approach could do abroad. But you've had also more recently more dramatic examples of that. Operation Ganga during the Ukraine conflict, where it wasn't just that 20,000 students were stuck. They were stuck in the most difficult part of the country, where there was actually fighting going on, where we had to in a sense, persuade the countries involved to halt their operations for our people to come out, and then bring them out while the rest of the country was also on the move, and bring them out to absolutely the other end of a very large country. And that we could do this, again, I've actually had counterparts who began by telling me, we actually got 2 planes out and So sometimes it's a bit embarrassing. They'll ask you, so how many planes did you get out? So you sort of say, okay, well, I had 90. Uh, but uh, but the point I am making is, again, you would have seen at that period the focus and the commitment with which the Indian system went to deal with this situation. That you had five neighboring countries. In fact, to each one of these countries, the minister was deputed saying, you go there and you stay there till everybody comes back. And you will personally make sure that the people coming back are well looked after and well organized for the return. So I say this again because, time passes by, events happen, people come back, and we then, it's somewhere there at the back of our minds. But you have to understand, abroad, it's one more element of our cumulative image. That it's a country which is not only willing, as I said, to deal with its seafarers and its blue collar or white collar workers abroad, but which will actually go into conflict situations and pull out its people. And then comes the other part, that it's not just about us. We have actually also developed the image of being what we call a first responder. Think back on some of the natural disasters of, say, the last 7-8 years. And, fast backwards a bit more. And I want you to remember the tsunami of 2004, December 2004. When the tsunami happened, a large part of the relief effort actually came from the US, from Europe, from Japan. A lot of tsunami happened. It was an Indian Ocean tsunami. We were the only Indian Ocean country which actually pulled our own weight. But the rest of this zone actually looked beyond the region for assistance because people didn't have the ability or the responsiveness for that situation. Now, look over the recent past. It could be the Nepal earthquake, it could be the Yemen civil war, it could be we had a mudslide in Sri Lanka, actually a water system breakdown in Maldives, a typhoon in Myanmar, a cyclone in Mozambique. And at least from Africa till, I would say, Philippines, if something happens today, we have been there, we've been there among the earliest, and the expectation of the region too. And that's what, again, counts in terms of branding. That in the last decade, we have built up a very credible record as a first responder. A first responder not only to their troubles, but every time actually we go in for our own people, and if there's somebody else out there, we bring them back too. It happened at Wuhan. Our first lot of flights which came back when the COVID happened there had foreign nationals in it, even from Ukraine. Many of you heard stories of citizens of other countries who came back. So the idea that, this is not only a country which today has the capability of, looking after its people, it has the generosity also to look after others. And then, of course, there's always the most noble cause: how do we save our planet? And I don't mean that facetiously. There are today existential problems. I think you can see what's happening in Pakistan. The enormity of climate change, I think, is now making itself felt in different ways. It's happened in India too. Most parts of India this year have got more rain than they've had for a long time. Many parts of India, certainly where I live, has experienced heat and cold of a degree which is not normal. So if you are looking at the big issues of the day, to my mind, climate change is one of the biggest issues. It is an existential issue. And so are we the laggards out here, or are we the leaders out here? I think that too is a debate which is increasingly moving forward in a favorable way to us. People today, when they think of India, they don't think coal, they think solar. when they as I said, digital is one part of our changing image. Renewable is another part of our changing image too. So, a country today which at our level of income, for us to contemplate green growth, to make the adjustments, to embrace the technologies to do that, that actually requires very bold leadership and a very deep commitment to ourselves as well as to the planet. And I think if you look in the field of climate action, actually it's interesting. In the last few years, there have been two big initiatives, something called the International Solar Alliance and another one called the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, because natural disasters are affecting the infrastructure, so you have to plan for them in advance. Interestingly, actually, both initiatives have come from India, and both today, the Solar Alliance has more than 100 members. The CDRI is moving up into the high double digits. And finally, I would say what adds to the transformational message of India on the move is actually our culture, heritage, and civilization. In 2014, when Prime Minister Modi came to the US, many of you remember that famous Madison Square Garden event. At that time, I was ambassador in the US, and he addressed the UN. And he shared with us, saying that, look, think about yoga. Think how universal it can become. Everybody in some form is doing it. If it can be collectively, universally motivated and promoted, and really, in a sense, driven by him, we actually went to the UN end of that year, got a resolution passed, got a certain global branding for celebrating yoga. Our yoga had a branding, but the idea of the entire world coming together on one day this was taking it to an altogether different level. And this year, in fact, you had the celebration of yoga. As the sun rose, it actually was celebrated around the world. Intuitively, in the minds of people, it is something which is very deeply connected with India and with Indian civilization. Along with that, there is a greater promotion of traditional medicine, of health and wellness practices of India. And the interest which the world is today showing in India is something important. It is important for the world's understanding of India, because at the end of the day, we are a civilizational society, which is once again, you can say, taking its place in the leadership of the world. So, if I were to sum it up, to me, an India which is now, all of you, I think, would have seen this probably today and yesterday, 5th largest economy. We were 10th largest a decade ago. So, a 5th largest economy, a digital economy, one which comes out of the pandemic stronger, which today is among the largest, fastest growing major economies of the world, which has a talent and skill and a capability to address a lot of shortages in a very demographically challenged world economy. And a civilizational state which has its heritage, its culture, its experiences to bring. A democracy which debates its problems, which is able to harmonize its interests with those of the world, which can look after its people, almost 1/5 of the world, but which has time and mind space for other people as well. I think that's the brand which, in my view, we have built in the last 10 years, which I believe has really transformed our image. I quite accept that this is work in progress, but I'm very confident that that work will continue. So once again, thank you for your attention, and I will of course be happy to address or listen to anything that you might have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Excuse me. Thank you, Minister, for that excellent summary of how indeed India's place in the world has changed over the last decade or so, and how people in the rest of the world look at us. Sometimes one needs to be reminded that we are indeed moving forward in great steps, and I think that was very well put together. With your permission, I will kind of set the ball rolling with questions, and then Yakshit as well, and we will also ask the audience to ask you some questions. And in the spirit of we are doing well, but how can we do better? I would like to start off by asking a question about the service, the foreign service itself. You have been a member of the service, and now as minister, you head the service. I have always wondered